Star Wars is a franchise that is currently undergoing a state of essentially implosion. It is a franchise that was once well known all around the globe for being something that spoke to universal human experiences. Some will say that the sequels will age just like the prequels. That's not true. The prequels came in at a time which was very peculiar for pop culture. At that time, cult movies from the 80s we're essentially reframing how we look at the quality of movies, probably being a little bit less elitist about those movies. However, I think that whole culture around cult movies has largely faded. It's not the same anymore. Um, the younger generation is not interested in cult movies like Gen Xers or older millennials. Some may, but generally speaking, most of them are interested in TikTok and influencers are interested in cult movies. So the prequel, the prequels were aging mainly because it was caught up in that culture, cult movies, and also, you know, it was not owned by Disney yet. The sequels are owned by Disney; they have their markings on it. The sequels are professionally, look technically impressive, but they're not interesting movies. There's nothing there. There's no texture to anything. It's a very flat product. There's nothing to see. Just a bunch of people putting costumes and a bunch of vignettes tied together in sporadic action scenes here and there. It's not really interesting. So, anyone who's saying that the sequels will age just like the prequels has to understand human culture, any culture on the planet, whether it be the most primitive or the most advanced, is going to be peculiar. Every time, every age in human history is different from each other. Just because it happened with a particular style of movie in a particular time in its particular context doesn't mean it will happen again. The companies tell people to say these things, like rose tinted glasses, or the idea that there's a generational cycle. It doesn't work that way. If you look at the 1920s, for example, Metropolis, for example, one of the most famous science fiction movies ever made, there was no like nostalgia for the science fiction of the 1890s. And they may have had some influence on some of the German expressionists who were working on that movie. But the 1920s was really much a break from the Victorian era, which goes from the 1830s all the way to about the 1900s, and you extend that with the Edwardian era. Star Wars is, by the time the sequels began, it was about 40 years. Franchises in general are pretty new as an idea. Uh, this franchise has been going on for a while. Most franchises burn out after 5 years. Previously, Star Wars has been remarkable for how long it's gone on. But I mean, it is not a franchise that has the same staying power that it once had. People who think that, just because the prequels have better press now, a lot of people still don't really care about the prequels. There isn't really any consensus, really, you can see amongst normies about whether the prequels are better or not. It's pretty much just wish casting at this point. The sequels are not going to have that treatment. They are objectively pretty bad movies. Objectively speaking, they're technically impressive, but overall, we don't go to, we're not watching tech demos here. I mean, this isn't the point of watching a movie. We want to see characters, story, themes, um, you know, interesting dialogue, you know, interesting interplay between characters. You know, that's what we want to see. The setting, the effects, that's secondary. It's very important, just like the music, which is almost like the DNA to a movie. But the sequels don't have that. Technically, as I said before, they're impressive, but overall, they're not much. There isn't much to them. Even the cast doesn't really want anything to do with the movies. And human beings, you know, you have to understand the axiom says misery loves company. And let's be honest here, the prequels came at a time when the internet was not as centralized as it is now. So anybody who wants to say, oh, the prequels are great, will be overwhelmed by video after video on YouTube and blog posts saying how horrible the sequels are, right? This prequels didn't have that. And also another thing is that the prequels had the Clone Wars series, right? And that helped a lot in helping rehabilitate the prequels amongst the hardcore fan base. Maybe not amongst the casual fans who really didn't care about it, but you know, and also politically speaking, the sequels are tied to essentially a Democrat run organization. It's no surprise, right? I mean, it's almost impossible for the sequels to get that off of their back. The prequels were at least somewhat, you know, hiding their both biases or whatever. The sequels don't have that. All these people are on camera saying crap about other people. I mean, how you can't get away from that, you know? And in this day and age, it's just like people want to wish cast the other side away and not want to have to deal with them, but we're in the same country with each other. And to be honest, left wing people, Democrats, tend to be very immature. Not all, but that's what I see from a lot of the younger people, and even the older folks who just kind of want to take the younger people for a ride so they can get more money and power. And pretty much Disney at this point is pretty much a political organization. They may make movies, but they don't really have the charm anymore like during the Walt Disney days. They're not interested in building up America, building the mythology. They're not interested in that. They just want to milk everything. And this isn't about rose tinted glasses, which is nothing more than propaganda to say, well, everything's better in the present, which it's not. But the thing is, the sequels are politicized. It's very difficult to get away from that. And also, just because something was in the past doesn't mean it will get better. For example, Tron, for example, was hailed as a great movie at the time. But now, yeah, some people are meh about it. Some people don't like it. I think it's interesting. I haven't even really watched it, but as a concept, it's a very interesting movie. But just because something took place in the past and people may have loved it, doesn't mean people will always love it. Objectively speaking, there's nothing to the sequels. There are so many movies coming out all the time, and reputation of Disney has gotten worse, not just with Star Wars, but with other properties like Marvel and what they've been doing with, Pixar, and that they have to rely on sequels like Inside Out in order to prop up the prop up the company. And that's not good for Star Wars because it shows that they're out of ideas. They don't know what to make. There's no metropolis, that's going to reset the industry. There's no energy left. It's really just about running numbers now. That's all they care about. They're just interested in propping up the company. So the sequels will not have any rehabilitation at all. Um, there is nothing comparable to the Clone Wars to help the prequels. I mean, to help the sequels. The prequels, in many ways, the reason why it's gotten better, at least in some circles, is because video games, a willingness amongst fans, to engage with the expanded universe, which was helping the prequels. Disney got rid of the expanded universe. So what do we have with the sequels? No one wants to read a sequel era book. The only sequel era show that has had any success is The Mandalorian. And The Mandalorian takes place literally in the beginning of the sequel era. And it's too close to the original trilogy. So it has the original trilogy, as I said before, on this channel and other videos. Um, the original trilogy is really the heart of Star Wars. The prequel trilogy is kind of the supporting structure. The sequels don't really have any real place in it. They're movies. That's basically what they are. They're part of the mythology. They've ruined the expanding universe in order to pursue their own agenda and to make it their own, essentially. And every human being, in a sense, wants to control their own destiny. They want to put their mark on it and say, this is mine, this other guy was not right. But the sequels are not objectively better. They haven't made anything better. They don't respect the property. They don't respect the story. They don't respect the mythology. They don't respect the lore. They don't respect the aliens. The aliens are boring. The settings are boring. They reuse the same ships in the sequel. In the prequels, you couldn't even tell the original trilogy. Sequels, everything looks like a copy of the original trilogy. It's horrible. So I think what's important here to remember is that our culture is moving more quickly than ever before. We're more cynical than ever before. Our country doesn't work like it did before. People are not going to remember some stupid movies that made, and let's be honest here, the sequels were making less money of every other movie. The Rise of Skywalker only barely made over $1 billion, while Return of the Jedi was incredibly successful. And Return Revenge of the Sith, incredibly successful, more successful than the second movie. Not so with this trilogy. So anybody who's saying that they would get better because it's generational cycle is repeating corporate propaganda, honestly, that everything that we make as human beings is going to go through its own cycle. But we can't tell what it's going to be. 30 years, 1,000 years, who knows? But if something is objectively not great, if something is just putting things together to make money, the truth wins out. People will support what they think is beautiful and has purpose and elevates their culture. The sequels do not do that. They're merely products. That's pretty much what they are, made by committee. The original trilogy has soul. The prequels have soul. They have their flaws. The sequels have some positives, but they're very few. They're few and far between. At the end of the day, the sequels and the prequels are the real Star Wars. Thank you for listening to my video, and please remember to subscribe. And here's what I want to say. You can enjoy the sequels, but you have to remember, they are not the real Star Wars. And people saying that the fans are being toxic, they don't know what they're talking about. What we want is quality. We want something that gives us life, gives us soul, enriches our lives. We don't want something that's just content. Content isn't a story. Story has gotta come before content. Thank you for listening to my video. Thank you.